Hello, everyone. Here we go with another episode of the Cosmic Matrix Podcasts with your hosts, Bernhard Gunther and my wife, Laura Matsu. So in this episode, we're going to explore the relationship between personal will and divine will. Aligning our little personal will with the higher will is really one of the most important transitions on the spiritual path. It really changes how we act, how we choose, how we respond to life, how we meet everyday challenges, and how we begin to sense that there's actually a higher force that guides us beyond our personal desires and preferences. Most of us live with a mixture of striving, resistance, and a desire to control how life unfolds, right? We all have our likes and dislikes, obviously our hopes, fears, goals, and dreams. But at the same time, something deeper in us may begin to call us towards a higher surrender and an alignment with something that is actually way more aligned with who we truly are beyond the surface personality. But what does that actually mean? Does surrender mean giving up our will completely? Does this spiritual alignment with the higher force mean doing nothing or simply going with the flow on the path of least resistance? The question really is, how do we know when we're acting from more our personal egoic striving and when we are responding to something deeper or higher calling, so to speak? So in the first part of this podcast, we're going to look at the personal will, what it is, how it operates, when it becomes distorted, and why it eventually will reach its limits. We will also explore the crisis of the personal will, the different aspects of will, why free will on the personal ego level is only relatively real and mostly an illusion, and how the so-called attention economy and social media nowadays and technology weaken our will, and why sincere psycho-spiritual work also requires the engagement of what is called the spiritual will. And in part 2, for our members, you can always sign up to the membership at my website, veilofreality.com/membership. In part 2, we're going to go deeper into said spiritual will and the surrender and alignment with divine will. We explore what true surrender actually means, why it actually requires also an active participation rather than just being passive, how the personal will can become an instrument of divine will, and why alignment with the divine also does not mean that life just becomes free of challenges, interferences, or resistance. Now, before we start, a very quick announcement. I still have a few spots left in my upcoming 10-week live program, Mastering Spiritual Warfare, Unveiling the Unseen Forces and the Path to Embodied Sovereignty. It starts July 15th until September 20th. This live program is a deep dive into spiritual discernment, protection, entity interference, psychic attacks, shadow integration, divine guidance, and embodied sovereignty during this intensifying time of transition as the veil is thinning and we become more aware and intersecting with the spiritual realities and beings inhabiting them. We will explore how these unseen forces influence our thoughts, emotions, also relationships, and the spiritual path, how hostile forces exploit our wounds and weaknesses, and also, most importantly, how to strengthen our connection to the divine forces for protection, guidance, and assistance. Each week over the 10 weeks also includes live lectures, exercises, psycho-spiritual integration practices, and an extensive resource library you can return to again and again. The goal is really to help you embody these teachings in a practical, applicable way so you can use them and apply them directly into your life and relationships and work and unique path really during this time of transition. Enrollment is by application only and space is limited. About 70% of the spots are now already taken, and you can learn more about it at the website masteringspiritualwarfare.com. Okay, let's talk about the will. What is really the relationship between our personal desires, our ambitions, our goals we have in life, our preferences? We all have our likes and dislikes, right? Our actions, and the deeper movement of divine will, personal will and divine will. Now, most of us in this world, we like to control life, right? We think we need to control everything. Many people push and try to bend life according to their personal desires often without questioning also where those desires and life goals actually come from. This is a whole topic in itself, right? Pursuing life goals, desires, aims, all great and good, but most often they also can come from conditioning, from cultural, social programming, parental programming, upbringing, trauma responses, all of that. But especially in our very action-driven Western world, a lot of emphasis is placed on the personal world to make it happen, especially in the US, right? Do it, make it happen, work, effort, and making things often happen through force, right? And this has its place, absolutely. But then the other extreme is that some people fall into a passive form of spirituality. They believe that surrender to divine will means not acting or not committing, not making any choices, not making any effort, and just simply letting things happen or going with the flow as if God will do everything for them. But the spiritual path does not ask us to become passive bystanders who merely observe everything. It asks us to become conscious and ultimately align personal will and with divine will. And this is what we really want to explore in this two-part podcast. Now, forced personal will and mistaking surrender with having no will at all are basically the two extreme distortions of what aligned conscious will is really all about. But will is also one of the most important part of the inner work, very necessary, because without will, then you cannot focus, you cannot concentrate. There's no capacity to really stay with discomfort, and there's no progress because you get distracted, you cannot commit. So we need to build up a will. Many people actually think the spiritual path is kind of about giving up the will again, right? Of just going along with the flow, and then spirituality and the concept of non-attachment have become very distorted that way. But very important to understand is that before the will can actually be surrendered to the divine, it has to be developed, purified, and really brought under conscious control. So we're not just mechanically acting based on unconscious wounds, shadow, programming, conditioning, and all of this. So in short, before we can actually talk about divine will, we really need to understand the personal will.
Yeah, I think this is why ordinary self-development is so popular, because I do think we live, especially as technology has progressed. If you look at like how many things are now done for us that we used to have to do through manual labor, and manual labor is actually a good way of developing just a basic physical brute will. So I saw this graph recently about how much time we used to spend on housework, like 100 years ago versus now. And you just saw it slowly dwindling because we didn't have dishwashers, we didn't have vacuum cleaners. Like we used to have to physically do everything ourselves. So now we have a lot more comfort, and even arguably with AI, like AI is just doing all these tasks for a lot of people, who are using it. But in that process, I feel like our personal will has atrophied. Yeah. And we're just so used to like being able to do things with a click of a button, literally. Like you can actually just go on your phone, press a few buttons, and someone will deliver you a meal to your door. Like that wasn't available even 60, 50 years ago, right? So in that process of having a life of convenience and comfort, our will has atrophied. And then on top of it, which we're going to go into later, is we live in this attention economy where everything wants to pull our attention every which way. And one of the biggest things that we see, especially with our program, because our program is pretty intense, Embodied Soul Awakening, and also your program as well, individually. But, one of the things that I've researched is that a lot of people will join courses, will join things, and they won't finish it. Like finishing a course is actually very rare, even when people make a significant investment. And it's usually a will issue. And, I have to also say, it's not necessarily an individual issue. It's a collective issue because the culture wants to pull your attention every which way. And we live in a world where things are increasingly done for us. So laziness is just increasing exponentially. Like we just want everything done for us. We're used to things having done for us. And even just having to do things physically has, diminished. So it's not, the thing is like when you're developing a will, you are really going against the waves of the current culture. You have to develop that drive and that motivation to just do things. And yes, that's not the be all end all, as we're going to talk in the podcast, but you cannot actually surrender your will to the divine unless you actually have a very strong will to begin with.
Exactly. Very good point. And then AI on top of it gives you the illusion of omniscient knowledge constantly at your fingertip, and that just reading something or letting AI summarize a book, then you think you understand it and can apply it. Right?
Yeah, it's thinking for us, it's creating for us, it's writing for us, it's doing all our tasks for us, So we live in this world where increasingly it's like humans are just, what is his name that Yuval Noah Harari guy? He said that humans are going to be useless feeders.
Useless feeders,
yeah. And that's what I'm kind of seeing is like we are in this insane consumption era where a lot of humans are not even truly developing themselves. They're not truly making an effort. They're just consuming and scrolling and clicking, and like their attention is fragmented. So, in many ways, although I don't agree with him philosophically, he was actually pointing out where society is heading. And I can see that already.
Exactly. Yeah. Good point. So let's start with the personal will, because it is important. Right? The personal will is really what motivates us, that helps us to move forward in life, helps us to focus and achieve things. Adyashanti said that this personal motivation of the personal will is an energy force that drives most human beings at a level of ordinary consciousness, ego identification, personality, the surface consciousness. Right? The personal will is then organized around basic human needs and concerns, and as I mentioned before, most often programmed by upbringing, social and cultural conditioning, media programming, all of this. It asks the question, will I survive? Will I succeed? Will I be loved? Will I be approved of? Will I be recognized? Am I happy? Is life meaningful? So all these questions create certain desires, certain drives with the personal will of the ego personality pursues. Right? Personal will is based on very strong likes and dislikes, which we all have, right? Based on our preferences. Mostly, generally speaking, pursuing pleasure and wanting to avoid pain or discomfort. It judges outcomes as success or failure, good or bad, most often based on what the ego thinks it wants or doesn't want, right? In most often very oversimplified ways. Never question where these desires actually come from. It wants life to conform to its preferences, and it wants to change the outside world to suit that. So that's how most people pursue happiness. They want to change the outside world. Some circumstances need to be in a certain place in their lives, relationship, career-wise, anything, in order to feel content and happy within. Right? So it's very externally outside driven. It wants to get what it wants and avoid what it does not want. Right? It wants confirmation that you're safe, loved, and in control. And none of this is inherently wrong. This is very important to understand. It's simply the way the human personality operates. That is very externalized, living under the illusion of separation. Right? The personal will tries to create a life that really provides security, and in some sense that life has meaning. And that's fine. We want security is important and whatnot. Right? So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater about the personal will. Yet, here is where it starts to get tricky, so to speak, and everybody who has engaged in inner work, started on the path towards awakening, spiritual work, started to questioning things, really started to observe oneself more sincerely, going within, beyond this personal ego personality and really questioning, who am I, to know thyself, you start then to question what it actually means when you say, this is my will, right? Because again, most people assume that their desires, impulses, attractions, or choices and preferences are simply their own, right? They feel something moving in them and conclude, I want this, I choose this is my truth, I don't like this. You can see it in yourself. We do this every single day. Choices based on these preferences.
Yeah, it also has to do with seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, which is which goes counter to change. Like often you do actually have to face uncomfortable things to change them in yourself.
Exactly. But again, as we dive deeper from an esoteric, especially occult perspective, this is not so simple. We will come face to face with actually the illusion of my own will and the illusion of free will on this level. Because what we experience as my will is influenced by many forces and beings working through the human being, through the porosity of mind. Because the mind is porous. All kinds of forces, energies, thought forms, beings flow through us at all times. This can also then include family conditioning, ancestral narratives, social programming, all kinds of cultural, social egregores, collective thought forms, elemental forces, and occult influences, beings and entities from both the divine and undivine planes, hostile, malevolent, but also benevolent beings. Some influences can also come from your deeper soul, from conscience, from your true self, so to speak, or higher guidance. And others come from collective thought forms, lower entities, and all kinds of unconscious movements in the collective field, because everything is interrelated. We are all part of it.
I would also argue that individuation gives you more choice in this as you are raised through your own family of origin in the culture you live in. You will be mostly influenced by the waves of your conditioning and culture. So, that's why you see a lot of people who haven't done a lot of inner work. They kind of fall for these psyops and these egregores because they don't know anything else. They're just going along with the conditioned patterning. But as you individuate, you develop more free will because you're no longer driven from that conditioning.
The process of individuation, deeper psychospiritual work is leading you to more free will, actually.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And by the way, listen to our previous podcast, A Guide to the Path of Individuation, for info about the path of individuation, because I've noticed lately that term has been completely distorted.
As always.
And now people think that individuation is just like feeling like you're sovereign and making my choice, but it actually, or like being, not listening to anyone and like just being a rebel, when it really actually has to be with exploring your unconscious, exploring your own shadow, going deep within. And, it does also have to do with exploring your dreams and your inner world. And so it has nothing to do with just putting on a personality of being like anti-status quo, which I think is what most people see it as.
They mistake it for an individual,
yeah,
right?
It's exactly individualism, but it's actually a very profound inner journey. It has nothing to do with external things. And I see a lot of people talking about individuation, but they don't actually talk about the inner journey, and they think it means just being a rebel, which it doesn't. Although individuation will make you weird and different to the current culture, most likely, it doesn't mean just being a rebel and not listening to anyone. Yeah. It's almost like a very immature...
Well, this ties into that as well, but there's a whole topic in itself. You have, like most truthers or people like anarchist movements, voluntarism, seek freedom from government, from the banking system, and, let's go in a community, have our own currency and whatnot, and reject the physical matrix.
Yeah.
But this is falling into this idea of that the individual's independent, which is not interdependent. Everything is interrelated. Nothing can be separate. And this illusory strive towards external freedom while you're still slave to your own programming, desires, conditioning, shadow, and all of this.
Yeah, and your own knee-jerk reaction against culture,
exactly,
too.
The shadow projections. So what it comes down to, many of these forces that move through us, which I just mentioned, from entities, beings, forces, collective thought forms, your own shadow, unconscious wounds, programming, all of that, we interpret as me, as I. We think everything is this single I, right? And then we believe on this surface ego personally that we are freely choosing, that we free will, when in reality we're actually responding to all kinds of impulses, suggestions, desires, fears, and forces we have not yet become conscious of. It's very mechanical, right? That's why Gurdjieff talked about humans who are really not engaged in this deeper work and become more self-aware. He equated them to machines, right? So this is really the part of the illusion of free will at the level of the ordinary ego, which the personality identifies with. Because the ego experiences itself as the doer, right? It believes I am choosing, I am deciding, I'm willing. But much of what we call this personal will is, again, this mixture of all kinds of conditioning, collective influences, lower impulses, and forces and beings and energies working through us. That's why one of the biggest parts of the psychospiritual path on the awakening is being able to differentiate within what is part of my true nature I need to integrate, what I need to reject. So that's really the whole point of to know thyself, the practice of self-observation, to being able to differentiate. And this is not just an intellectual discernment, right? There's a necessity to create a certain spiritual sensitivity, psychic and spiritual organs that are part of this process of the inner work.
Yeah. And also we need to differentiate between what's a strong emotion versus what is true intuition. So a lot of us are actually mainly guided by strong emotions. So we like things, we don't like things, we want to avoid painful thoughts, we want to avoid painful experiences, we want to move towards experiences which are not painful. So there's an inherent survival instinct within it, but within that we tend to just go wherever our emotions guide us. Or if you're a very head-centric person, it's all in the intellect and you can actually be cut off from your emotions. That's why in the New Age, when they say just trust your feelings and follow your heart, it can be actually very deceptive because you just trusting positive feelings does not mean that it's necessarily true or it's coming from higher guidance. It can be positive feelings because you feel that this is going to get you the approval of people or your parents, or it can be coming from your own conditioning. So, feelings are information, but they're not inherently trustworthy in themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So really what it comes down to, the more unconscious we are of our inner world, the more we identified with this ego personality we think we are, the more unconsciously and more easily we're moved by all kinds of forces and beings we mistake for our own will flowing through us. But the more conscious we become through this inner process, the more we begin to discern what is truly moving us and what we align for us, what is coming, from my shadow, from an inner child part, from a sub-personality, from, parental conditioning, from ancestors, cultural, social conditioning. What is a desire? This is actually based on a trauma response or trying to cover up a wound, trying to fill a hole within. It's not truly coming from my true self. What is coming from like just vanity or insecurity from all kinds of external influences, media, collective fields, or even entities and egregores, right? So this differentiation is key. And amidst all of that, what is my true conscience? What is truth with the capital T? What is my soul being, my true self, and the divine acting through us, as a channel, so to speak? That's why self-observation, psycho-spiritual work, and differentiation, and knowing what to accept, what to integrate, and what to reject are essential on the path. This is the whole point of the inner work, because we cannot surrender the will to the divine if we have not yet discerned what is actually moving our will, if we have not purified our will, so to speak. So before the personal will can become a true instrument for divine will to give to the divine, so to speak, it must be separated or cleared of unconscious influences, lower impulses, all kinds of forces, occult suggestions that disguise themselves as my will or my doing, right? Only then can the will begin to be purified and then aligned with something higher.
And that's easier said than done, but I think it is really important to understand, to be aware of your own inner world, to be aware of your own strong emotions, to be able to quiet the mind, to be able to actually process some of the emotions from your past so that they're not so strong and guiding you every which way, because there is a sense of equanimity and objectivity and a calm mind that's necessary in order to actually feel that intuitive guidance.
Yes.
If your mind, like I know for myself, if my mind is like spiraling mentally around an issue, I'm not going to be able to hear intuition or some higher guidance, but only when I feel centered and present and kind of, mentally still, then do I actually get that guidance.
That's why the meditation practice is
essential.
key.
Yeah, it's essential. And I know you need a will to even start that practice. So
exactly. So, it's the irony. It's a lot of paradoxes we're going to
I think
here.
the thing though with meditation that I've noticed is that I like how I've learned to like the feeling of how I feel more when I do it consistently versus when I don't do it. So if I go even like a day or two without meditation, my mind gets so much more scattered. I get so much more easily distracted. I feel that I'm carrying more emotion with me because I do meditation where I focus on the body, where I breathe into the things that I'm feeling. I kind of release some of the backlog of unprocessed emotion that I've picked up throughout the day. So I feel this backlog. I almost feel like my backpack of like what I'm carrying gets heavier. And the more unprocessed emotion you carry in your body, the more crazy the mind gets, actually, interestingly. So I don't like feeling that way. And so in a way, I've trained my desire to like avoid pain and like more peaceful experiences to like meditation, because the ultimate reality is that we are carrying so much unprocessed emotion that from the day, from the week, from our whole lives. And that's what makes our mind so crazy and all over the place, because our mind is constantly trying to avoid the thing that we're feeling. But if we would just spend a few minutes breathing into it, we wouldn't have to run away from ourselves all the time with distractions, with social media, with alcohol, drugs, whatever you're doing.
You know what's interesting? I was recently saw somebody, what's very popular nowadays is just control your thoughts, change your thoughts. Don't think negative, positive, this whole like personal development and all of this.
Yeah.
And somebody made a post, if you don't want to feed the archons, the entities, don't produce the illusion, just don't give it to them, control your thoughts, like be a stoic. Mm-hmm. But I realized, hold on. Yeah, sometimes we need to, but what you just hinted at is very true. And even David Hawkins said that as well, that over 90% of the thoughts we have are the result of suppressed emotions.
Exactly.
So just trying to control thoughts is, maybe from the outset, is literally just symptom management.
It can actually be just dissociation.
Exactly. So you need to sometimes confront the underlying emotion, which doesn't feel good, that produces, David Hawkins said, one suppressed emotion can create all kinds of thousands of thoughts, thought loops constantly based on the negative emotion that we don't like to feel.
But that's very seductive to our left-brained, head-centric world, is just think positive thoughts and just cut off from the body, which is kind of like what everyone does, right? They just even, trying to avoid, an issue in your life is a way of controlling your life, which is what most people do. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to feel it. So yes, I agree. And I've actually learned that from direct experience. So just sitting, even if it's just for 5 minutes, and feeling what you're feeling will actually make the thoughts easier and you will get less distracted. So you can use that as a motivation. So since we like to avoid pain and seek pleasure, just understand your life will become easier if you process some of the stuff that you're holding on to.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the crisis of the personal will, because everybody who is really sincere on the path will be confronted with the limits of the personal will. Or when something happens in your life, when despite how much you wanted something, you worked for it, put all the effort, all the visualizations, manifestation rituals, all what I've done in my past, and you still do not get what you preferred, what you wanted, right? It can be a disillusionment. It can happen through loss, right? Or success, that even when you still get something, you still feel empty and unfulfilled inside, because the personal will cannot alone satisfy the soul, your true soul being your true self, right? And that's when actually naturally the turn comes inward to seek something beyond what the ego personality thinks it wants. That's a big turning point in many people's life. That's almost the initiation, so to speak, the disillusionment, when we understand and truly realize the limitations of personal will, and that you will never be fully fulfilled by just externalizing, by trying to get or change the outside will through your personal will. So at that moment, really the question changed from what the personal will usually asks is, how do I get what I want, to who am I and what is truly being asked of me?
Yeah, so let's go through some stages of development of the will, and maybe you can kind of see yourself in this. So I'm going to draw from Psychosynthesis and Roberto Ascioli's work. And he talked about 4 developmental stages of the will, which basically build on each other: strong will, skillful will, good will, and transpersonal will. And I find it really interesting when I was reading this over again, because I realized that we have an insane issue of weakening of the will. So the first level of will is strong will. This is basically our ability to mobilize our energy, to direct it towards a goal, to basically go after the things that we want in life, to achieve things, the ability to say no, the ability to stay focused, the ability to do things even when we're getting distracted or we're getting pulled in different directions, persistence, so I feel that even the strong will has become relatively rare in the world. So a lot of people, when they make a decision, they actually just get distracted, or they know they need to do something and they set a goal, but they aren't able to sustain the energy to complete it. And so it is really important for us to build that muscle to really do things that we've been putting off, focus, be determined, follow through. I find that especially with social media, you have to understand that they hire psychologists to try and make us distracted by it. So we need to block these apps. They're working against us, and really use train our attention. I made this post about attention span maxing, watch a whole 3-hour talk without getting distracted. Just take bathroom breaks, watch the whole movie. How many people, it's crazy. People will watch movies now and then be doing something on their phone at the same time. That's the worst thing for your attention. Or even just reading an hour a day. What I've noticed, and I think he talks about this in Stolen Focus, is that it's actually really easy to retrain the attention again, but we have to block social media, and especially the short form videos. The short form videos absolutely annihilate your attention span very quickly. We already know this. So, even physical practice, going for a 2-hour hike or doing a whole 1-hour yoga, anything that requires sustained attention and effort, we need to retrain ourselves to do, because the current culture, especially with Uranus and Gemini and all these air and fire this air and fire era we're in, is going to fragment our attention so far that it's going to be crazy. I think we're going to literally have rehab for short form videos. But at this point, so that's the first level, is someone who's able to focus, sustain energy to carry something through. And then the second aspect is skillful will. So skillful will is the intelligent direction of your energy. It's being able to use your time and energy wisely. So he uses the analogy that strong will is a horse and skillful will is the ability to steer it. So this is what's the best use of my time and energy today? It's knowing when to push, knowing when to wait, it's knowing when to act, it's knowing when to redirect attention away from draining things, channeling our time and energy constructively, choosing our battles wisely, conserving energy for what matters, not wasting energy on just, the wrong thing, which I think a lot of people do, is they'll just kind of spiral mentally around an issue when they just need to snap themselves out of it and focus on something constructive. So that's also another aspect of will that we need to develop. So, if you're someone who tends to spend all day doing nothing and you're like, what did I even achieve today? That's important that you develop that skillful will. Or if you try to just keep forcing things when you know that you just kind of need to give it a break, or, if you find yourself engaged in just endless battles and you just, this is also an aspect of emotional dysregulation, is we tend to respond to the most triggering content online. And people who create short form videos now know that, actually, and they intentionally try and trigger us because they know it'll get us to watch the video. They know it'll get us to watch just their content and comment, right? And I feel like a lot of people just waste their time just doing and responding emotionally to things. So we need to get this habit of pausing before acting and realizing, is this a good use of my time and energy, or is it better spent in other ways? So those are the first two levels. And I would argue that majority of people I see in this culture are actually working on those first two levels. And you can't build the next level where it starts to get more infused with spiritual qualities unless you build those first two levels. So strong will, the ability to motivate, to generate energy, to focus attention on a goal, and skillful will is using that time and energy wisely. And then the third aspect of goodwill is where our will meets love, basically. So we have a will to want to approach others with respect, with empathy, to treat others as we would want to be treated ourselves. We're concerned about using our time and energy towards the well-being of others, to help others. And this has to be exercised against our own triggers, against our own issues, against our own your irritations or judgments. So, it's not just pretending to be nice, it's directing your energy towards actually being good to others, which is easier said than done, right? But making that choice to have compassion and empathy and act that out in the world. And I would argue this is even becoming more rare. And, he outlined that this is actually most needed in the world. I think people tend to treat each other with more hostility, with less goodwill as of late, at least is what we see, and the way that social media has affected us and the way we talk to each other. The whole polarization in the world is like people actually treat each other with more hostile will. It's very interesting. It's like they're really the polar opposite. And there's a genuine lack of, a lot of social psychologists talk about this lack of social trust that we have, where we used to be able to knock on our neighbor's door and like ask them for a favor, and like that's long gone. Like I used to be able to do that as a child. So
people also, because people are so online all the time, they lose relationship skills or social intelligence.
Yeah. And you see that, like, I'm really almost shocked sometimes. I try not to read comments on social media. I just don't have the time and energy. And it's also an aspect of my own skillful will. It's like, I can't waste my time doing this. But sometimes when I look at it, I'm like, wow, like people are really angry and mean and hostile and distrustful, at least. And people say, oh, that's just online. No, I definitely feel this affects how people are in waking life. If you're spending your online life being like that, it will have an impact. Maybe you won't feel so brave to say that mean thing to that person when there's no longer, you're no longer just behind a screen on an anonymous profile, but that being that way to people will affect you in some way. It doesn't have no impact. So goodwill is just basically trying to be a nice person to others, trying to be kind to others, trying to help others, to understand that what helps others helps you, to not be so self-interested. And then the last aspect is this transpersonal will, which is basically pointing at divine will or spiritual will. So you have to have developed all these previous kinds of will to develop this transpersonal will. So when you say surrender to divine will, but then you're constantly distracted and you're not spending your time and energy wisely, you actually need to go back and develop the strong will and build that muscle, because you don't have anything to give up. You can just use this idea of surrender to divine will to just basically just do whatever you want all the time, or do whatever, your own emotions are driving you towards. So this last aspect, transpersonal will, is using all three other aspects of will and giving it up to something greater than the personal self. So it's usually a pull or call towards becoming the person you're meant to be, to doing what God wants to do through you. It involves, meditation, prayer, surrender, developing qualities of self like courage, compassion, being truthful, humility. Like, it's amazing because, again, we like to think that we are really honest with ourselves, but when we're really honest with ourselves, we'll actually see all the sophisticated ways we lie to ourselves. Even if we're sincere on this spiritual path, there's all sorts of justifications and stories that our ego tells us based on what we think we want, what we want to go after, that we're really skilled at lying to ourselves. So if you're really honest with yourself, the first thing you're going to see is how skilled you are at lying to ourselves. And we really need to realize that there's some sort of calling that we are here to do. It's not about just doing nothing. It's surrendering that strong, skillful goodwill to something larger, and stop asking, like, what do I want? What do I like? What do I dislike? But what is mine to do? And from my experience, what is yours to do will not always feel comfortable. It will often stretch you past your comfort zone. You're going to have all sorts of ego justifications. And I think there's many ways that people hear the call of their own purpose, but they don't answer the call again and again and again. And then it shows up in symptoms in their lives like depression and meaninglessness, or what they do is they get involved in just like chaos and toxic relationships. So there's a million ways that people hear that call, and then they hang up the phone and they distract themselves. And then eventually that voice gets quieter and quieter, and then they're just caught in their own conditioned patterns again. So just kind of thinking about, do you mostly act from your personal desires, from your likes, dislikes, or do you feel this pull of something larger that's orienting your choices and what you do from day to day that goes beyond your personal preferences? Because I feel like God's plan for us is often very different to what our ego plans for us. And it can be very annoying, actually, when you realize that it's like your life purpose is something that you were specifically designed to do. But what we like to do is we like to chase the things that will win us approval of our parents, of our peers. We like to do things that will give us belonging, make us fit in, right? So we have to go against that. And that's what the whole process of individuation is about. And again, I'll just touch on this because I've already spoken to this, but we really live in this attention economy where we have to go against the waves of the current culture and gain the ability to focus and hold attention again. There's no way that we can improve at something, learn something new without a sustained attention. We live in this world. It's very Gemini, especially with Uranus in Gemini. We're always skimming the surface of things. We just watch like little clips or look at little memes and we think we understand something, but we actually haven't gone deep with something. And so, we live in, and now it's gotten even worse, I would argue. People thought social media was bad, but now we have this 90-second reel and TikTok culture where, the marketers are literally telling people, like, make people angry, get them triggered, how to capture people's attention. So we have this whole rage bait culture where people have realized the best way to get people's attention is to make them angry, is to say something polarizing, is to like shame and, create conflict and create more polarization. And so we have to see that our attention is constantly being hijacked. Our energy is constantly leaking. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to look back on their lives. And I've heard this is even happening with older people these days and be like, what the hell did I waste my life on? I didn't do what I was here to do. So some practical ways to do this, I use an app blocker on every single device I have, on my computer, on my phone, on my iPad, and I don't engage in any social media in morning or evening. When I do engage with it, I only allow myself on for 15-minute blocks at a time. And then I also make an intention to read for at least an hour a day. So if you can't do that, an easier task, just watch like a whole movie or, just do something that's more maybe passive. I personally recommend reading. I think it's really important. We're atrophying our ability to read. I understand if you have kids and your attention is constantly distracted in different directions, it's a whole different story. However, what you can do is you can not at least layer distraction on top of distraction and at least be present with the distraction of your kids, essentially, because we are really in an era where attention spans are shortening. We're becoming dumber. We're becoming more shallow. We're losing the ability to read. And I really feel that people who are going to be successful in this next era are mainly the people who are going to have the ability to focus, because they're going to be the people who are going to develop skills and abilities that go beyond this kind of mental atrophying we're experiencing. So it's really important to see that the more our intention is fragmented, the more our will is weakened. And the current culture is designed to do that and to do things to help us go against that stream.
Okay, so in this part one now, we just looked at the personal will, the crisis of personal will, the different aspects of will, as Laura shared, the attention economy that's driving you away, that's weakening your will, the importance to really have the foundational personal will, or being able to hone focus attention and developing the will. And now in the second hour, then we will go deeper into the spiritual will. Also, David Hawkins called the importance of the spiritual will that is also very much needed when engaging in psycho-spiritual inner work, right? There needs to be a certain will to engage in the work, to deal with discomfort, to not shy away, to not give in to all kinds of excuses, rationalizations. Oh, that is not the right time. I can't do it right now, which a weak will easily succumb by, even through thoughts that aren't your own, because that's when the interferences come, right? From other beings and entities that tag into your inability to focus, that give you all kinds of excuses why you can't engage in this work right now, and they just keep you, as it's called, in the wilderness, so to speak, in esotericism, or you can call it the wilderness of the matrix. So we'll dive deeper in part 2 into the spiritual world, and essentially which is needed then to divine with divine will, right? We will explore what true surrender to the divine actually means, what it doesn't mean, the many misconceptions and distortions, why it doesn't mean to go with the flow at all. We look at the signs of being aligned with divine will. And also, very important, why surrendering to the divine and alignment of divine will does not mean that life becomes just free of challenges, resistance, or interferences. So with all of that, we'll be right back. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up on my website, veilofreality.com/membership. I have access to over 170 episodes, all the second parts. And also, if you want to participate in my upcoming program, Mastering Spiritual Warfare, where we go deeper into the inner differentiation of what is what, with all these forces, beings, and thought forms, and everything that's flowing through us, and really connect to who we truly are, check out masteringspiritualwarfare.com to learn more. Thank you, and we'll be right back.